what I was asked to do was to look at the big picture, and I'm going to try to do that. So I'm not going to focus just on Citizens United. In fact, I'm going to try and go a little bit outside of the box. So I want to start with an op-ed that Scott Turow wrote about a month ago in the New York Times. Scott Turow, the novelist and lawyer, was commenting on the hung jury in the Rod Blagojevich case. In it, he pointed out that there was a very thin line between what the Supreme Court considers bribery and what it considers protected speech. While apparently it's quite true that you cannot explicitly offer a candidate money in return for a specific vote, anything short of that is protected by this Supreme Court's majority view of the First Amendment. In other words, it's a question of verbal dexterity. Between the candidate and the donor, there has to be a certain amount of subtlety and communication. And that's true whether the donor is corporate or individual. And while some of us might have found the jury's reluctance in the Blagojevich case to be a bit odd, given all the quotes we heard, the taping of the phone conversations between Blagojevich and various people he was trying to sell a Senate seat to, Turow is more sympathetic to the hung jury. And I'm going to quote from him. "I suspect the jury's indecision might have been a reaction at some level to the hypocritical mess our campaign financing system has become, especially in light of recent Supreme Court jurisprudence about political donations," i.e. the Citizens United case. Turow goes on to cite the 2009 case involving Joe Blankenship, the chief executive of Massey Coal. That's the same Massey Coal that was responsible for the deaths of 25 miners a few months ago. In 2004, Massey Coal had lost a $50 million fraud verdict to a rival coal company. In response, Blankenship spent $3 million in the campaign of a successful candidate to the West Virginia Supreme Court of Appeals, where the case was heading. Of course, the candidate won and provided the decisive vote needed in that case after first refusing to recuse himself from the case. So what did the US Supreme Court have to say to that? That probably in that case, the judge should have recused himself because of the size of the donation, which far eclipsed all his other donations combined. But the court refused to apply that rule universally for other judges receiving donations from litigants. Moreover, they found that nothing criminal had occurred. Given that logic, Turow asks, over again, who can blame Mr. Blagojevich for asking, why me? From that, Turow went on to dissect the Citizens United case, which removed, as Janice pointed out, the last fig leaf from the earlier Buckley versus Vallejo case by disregarding and throwing out any interest of the state in, quote, preventing the appearance of corruption. And because of that, Turow, like many people I know, concluded that our only hope is for a constitutional amendment reversing the notion that political spending is free speech. Now, I agree with that despair over the current Supreme Court, believe me. But I do not agree that the problem will be solved by declaring campaign spending not to be protected speech. I think we need to look much more deeply at the problem and at potential solutions. First, I would agree with Turow that the greatest problem caused by unrestricted campaign contributions is one of public cynicism. That cynicism reaches deep into the political process. Most members of the public, whether they're Tea Party members or their left-wing counterparts, believe that our elected representatives answer to the highest bidder. And there is good reason for them to believe that. Goldman Sachs contributed, this is an exact dollar amount, $994,795 to Barack Obama's presidential campaign. Citigroup contributed to Obama $701,290. J.P. Morgan Chase contributed $695,132. Now, given those amounts of money, these financial institutions did not have to ask for any specific favors. There didn't have to be an explicit ask. There was a donation that made an enormous difference. John McCain had opted into public financing during the general election, and because of that, he faced an $84 million limit on what he could spend. That put him at a huge disadvantage compared to Obama, who raised $66 million more than that in September 2008 alone. I just want to be perfectly clear. You are hearing this from an Obama supporter. But there is no doubt in my mind why the public was cynical, why the Tea Party is angry when the Obama administration, first of all, hires Larry Summers to run, well, and Tim Geithner, to run their financial operation, and then comes up with another $700 billion to bail out, might I say, Goldman Sachs, Citigroup, and JP Morgan Chase. So the question you have to ask is, what would change if we were to successfully amend the Constitution and limit corporate contributions? Personally, I think the wealthy would find other ways to fund the campaigns of their chosen candidates. Or you would have a situation like with Meg Whitman or John Corzine, who would simply fund themselves. As any political candidate will tell you, campaign finance laws are very complex, making it inevitable that those with the money to pay lawyers and accountants are able to meet the letter, if not the spirit of the law, and those with little money are swamped with meaningless record keeping. So, is it hopeless? No, it is not hopeless, but it will require far more far-reaching solutions than simply restricting corporate contributions or disclosure, frankly. We need to rethink because I think disclosure, we know what Goldman Sachs gives to people. Disclosure only builds cynicism, in my view. We need to rethink what electoral campaigns are all about, and we need to be willing to rewrite the rules from top to bottom. We hold ourselves out as the United States of America as a model of democracy and wag our fingers at everyone else in the world about free and fair elections. But the rest of the world looks at our electoral system and does not see anything remotely free. It's the most expensive electoral system in the world, and therefore not so fair. I looked online for the criteria that the Institute for Democracy and Electoral Assistance, which is this Sweden-based international UN-related electoral reform operation, multi-dimensional, at the proposals they put forward to developing countries, poor countries, countries coming out of dictatorship, countries coming out of civil war, as to what are the criteria for free and fair elections. Let me just read you some of their elements of this that they put forward. 1, allow free political advertisement for parties and candidates. 2, disallow paid political advertising altogether. 3, allocate equal time and space to all qualified candidates. 4, restrict time and content of electoral broadcasts. 5, require the media to carry voter education material. 6, establish a right to reply to factual misrepresentation in the media. 7, establish regulations against hate speech and defamation. All of those rules go to one of the most expensive aspects of political campaigns, the cost of media. Even here in the United States, we acknowledge, albeit rather weakly, that the airwaves are part of the commons, that they're owned by the public and thus open to regulation to further our interest in fair elections. We in fact still do require that broadcast licensees who give one candidate airtime for a paid political advertisement must provide equal media time at the same rates for all qualified candidates. But that's a long ways from disallowing paid political advertising altogether or allowing free political advertisement for parties and candidates. It is a far cry, and he who can afford TV ads wins. There is no legal reason why we could not include any or all of the rules promoted by the international pro-democracy organization I was just quoting from. There's no reason except the lobbying power of the media outlets and the cowardly nature of our Congress. But if we're going to talk about amending the Constitution, perhaps we need to consider the role of the media in political campaigns while we are considering possible amendments. We could also limit the time of campaigns. In the UK and in many other countries, campaigning is limited to a discrete window of time. In the UK, 17 working days from when the election is called. Imagine how much less cynical the public would be if they had only to listen to political campaigning for 4 weeks. A candidate could simply be disqualified if he or she began a public campaign before the legal campaign season. And premature independent expenditures before the campaign season outlaw the organization. Party primaries could be shortened. All incentive could be removed for states jumping the gun with earlier and earlier primaries. You could begin to have a civilized, intelligent election season. And what if we made publicly sponsored debates mandatory for all candidates? Debates not run by the entertainment media according to rules set by the major party candidates, but run by responsible, nonpartisan organizations. The League of Women Voters perhaps comes to mind. According to rules set by those bodies and not by the candidates. Debates where the public might actually find out what, if anything, a candidate has in mind for how to govern this country. And of course, the debates would be covered without cost by major television and radio stations. This is not crazy. This is what we ask of new democracies. And since, at least for now, we still own the post office as the public, why not mandate one free mailing of a uniform size to all constituents for each qualified candidate? We, in my opinion, are never going to stop the rich from spending more than the poor to influence elections. We can, however, dramatically limit the cost of elections and begin to win back the public's confidence in our electoral process. I believe we can build a bipartisan majority in the public, if not in Congress, to get these changes through. 230 years ago, democratic elections were the crown jewel in our revolutionary rhetoric. And I'd like to conclude by saying we need to be just as revolutionary today if we're going to preserve that democracy.